Okay, sorry. Good morning, everyone. This time, instead of a Dvar Torah, which I had sent last week to the community by the shul email we have once a week from the Kollel, a short Dvar Torah that we send out. So it was my turn last week. So whoever was able to hear it already knows what I'm talking about. So I won't repeat. But I do want to mention something that came up actually on the day of Yom Ha'atzmaut of Gimel Iyar this year. It was 2 days early. It had nothing to do with Yom Ha'atzmaut, seemingly. But for some reason, I suddenly, it occurred to me after having been said this prayer for tens or hundreds of thousands of times in my life until now, and suddenly I noticed something that I'd never noticed before, and I'm actually spreading it around to wherever I can, and seems like no one noticed it before. So I need some help understanding this point. In the Shmoneh Esrei, in the actually not 18, but 19 brachos, because originally it was 18 brachos that the Anshe Knesset Gdola had established and made up for us to pray. But then there was an additional one, the 19th, which was added by Shmuel HaKatan, hundreds of years after the days of the Shenas Gdola. He added another 19th. We'll soon discuss which one that was. But what occurred to me was that almost all of them, great majority of them, just begin with the first word that begins the bracha. You begin Baruch Atah Hashem, the first, of course, then Atah Gibor Olam Hashem, then Atah Kadosh, then Atah Chonen, then Hashivenu, Slach Lanu, Rafeinu, so on and so forth. Only 2 out of the 19 begin with a Vav. They start off with a Vav, as if it's sort of connected to the one before. The 2 are Vela Malshinim Al Tikva. Right, correct. We'll soon say that. We don't start La Malshinim Al Tikva. Rather, Vela Malshinim Al Tikva, and Vel Yerushalayim Ircha Berachamim Tashuv. Those are the only 2 out of the 19 that start with a Vav. So it puzzled me. How come? Either they should all begin with a Vav to show the connection one to another, or none of them should start with a Vav. Why 2 out of 19 begin with a Vav? So for some reason, I never noticed this till this past Yom Ha'atzmaut on Thursday morning. As I was down in Shmoneh Esrei, it suddenly pops to my eyes. Which is, no, that's not the beginning. The beginning is Modim Anachnu Lach. It's still the connection, yeah. There are a lot of Vavs in the midst of brachos to connect between 2 parts of a bracha. Like V'techazena Eineinu is a continuation of Retzeh. Retzeh is the beginning, and V'techazena is in the middle. There too, B'chol HaChaim B'du Chasela, B'al Kulam, that's all in the midst of Modim. And none of the others begin with a Vav except for these 2. Now, as Sarah just said here, just mentioned here, that Vela Malshinim Al Tikva, that's the added one. That's the 19th, which was added on much later. The reason it was added was because of Christianity spreading in those days. And Jews were connecting more and more to Christianity, unfortunately assimilating and switching to Christianity. So they wanted to make a bracha to pray for them not to go in that direction, and to pray that the Christianity won't be so cruel and mean to us like they were in those days. So it's mainly focused on that. And Shmuel HaKatan was the Tana who had written the bracha because he was Katan. He was very humble. And they said he's a person that's not biased, that's not, doesn't have self-interest in anything. So he'll make it very pure against evil and not anything personal. So that's why they gave him the job to write up this bracha. So there I can understand exactly for that reason why this bracha should begin with a Vav, because it's coming to remind us that this is an added on bracha. It wasn't always there. So it's like saying 18 ve la malshinim. Ve here not necessarily connecting to the bracha before, but telling us it's an addition. It's an additional bracha. That's why it could be a vav, like a mother says to a child who wants it to go buy something. So she says, buy me this, and that. So it's not necessarily connected. It's just one more thing. So that could be, I think, a good explanation for that vav. Also, I mentioned another explanation, which turned out as we were discussing this on our Shabbos table this last Shabbat, when I brought it up after noticing it on Thursday, we discussed it on Shabbat. So I mentioned that by Yedot HaMizrach, the Sfardim, they have no vavs in the entire 19 brachos. No vavs, which makes much more sense. As usual, the Sfardim seem to be more original than Ashkenazim, who's changed all kinds of things in the course of history due to maybe Christianity and the difficulties and the harassing of the Jews in Europe, in the Ashkenazic areas. But anyway, by the Sfardim, there's no vav in any bracha. How do they begin? Vela malshinim. They start off by saying laminim vela malshinim al ti'i tikva. And it doesn't say vela minim. Laminim vela malshinim al ti'i tikva. So I mentioned this at home. So my future son-in-law, who was by us for Shabbat, he came up with something very nice. He said, so it could be that the Ashkenazim also had the word laminim to begin with. Like the Sfardim, why should that be different? Just the Ashkenazim, the censor, the tzenzura, because of being afraid of the Christians at certain points in history, and laminim definitely is the people who are who deny Hashem. A min is a person who denies Hashem, who disbelieves in Torah and mitzvahs and all that. So it definitely was referring to Christianity. So the Ashkenazim were afraid, so they omitted it. So it turns out that it's really the second word of the bracha. So the Ashkenazim left the vav because it was originally laminim vela malshinim al ti'i tikva. They want me to drop laminim, so you like to vela malshinim al ti'i tikva. That's also a nice idea that can explain the vav very nicely. And then I thought that the idea would be that they forgot to take off the vav as well. When they dropped the laminim, they should have dropped the vav also and just said la malshinim al ti'i tikva. But then they said no, it could be on purpose to remind us that there was a word missing, because the censor in the end is not real. It's just because of the circumstances that we had to omit all kinds of things from the Shas or from our davening. So that vav is coming to remind us, don't forget, there was another word there, which we really mean and intend for it to be in our prayers, but we just can't say it because of the situation. So the vav is was left on purpose to remind us of that missing word. Hebel Varik also, yeah, right. So we have two good explanations for the vav of Vela Malshinim. Either it's to remind us always that it's an additional bracha that wasn't there to begin with, or it's just because one word was omitted and we're left with the vav for the second word of the bracha. But the big puzzling point, it remains the Veli Yerushalayim Yecha B'Chayin Tashuv. This I have no direction even to explain the vav there. First of all, by the Sfardim, how do they say this bracha? They say Tishkon betoch Yerushalayim Yecha. That's how they begin the bracha. Tishkon betoch. They say that as the second line. There's another vav, by the way, but that's common in the midst of the brachos from Esrei. There are many vavs there. You can have between two parts of the same bracha. So they begin as Sfardim Tishkon b'Yerushalayim Yecha, and then V'Yerushalayim Yecha Tashuv. I think they switch around, they flip around the order of the lines of the bracha. But in any case, they don't start off with the vav. We start with a vav, V'Yerushalayim Yecha Tashuv, and another vav, V'Tishkon b'Yerushalayim Yecha Dibarta. You can't even say there was for some reason flipped around and it should have been the second line, and that's why there's a vav there, because there's another vav for the second line. So there it seems to be that this vav, and there's no word that was dropped necessarily in the bracha before, because we don't know of any other nusach that has a word that should have been there that was dropped on the way. So the only reason here could be the vav chibur. not Vav Safa, and not because of a meaning word, but Vav Chibut, to connect between two parts. So it seems like Ala Tzadikim ve'ala Chasidim, the bracha right before Yerushalayim, Baruch Hashem Mishavadach Tzadikim, for some reason is intertwined and well connected to Yerushalayim B'Chavim Tashuv, that only if we merit being tzaddikim, if we work on becoming tzaddikim, and the entire nation will be worshiping Hashem, only then Yerushalayim will be built. That's what it seems like. There's a very strong connection. What's that? You found a few answers? Wow, on Google? Wow, that's great. So I'll hear it in a second. I'll just say that this answer doesn't please me at all because it's a Gemara in Megillah Yud Zayin, which explains the sequence, the order of all 19 brachos. Why are they put in this order? It's a very fascinating Gemara because this way we understand better our prayers. Why are we praying in this order exactly? What leads to what follows what? But each and every one has a connection to the one before. For example, the Gemara there says, Im ein dat tshuva minayin. If you don't have wisdom, if you don't know what's right and what's wrong, how do you do tshuva? How do we do tshuva if we don't know between right and wrong? And if we don't do tshuva, how are we expecting that Hashem should forgive us for anything? Slach lanu. Without tshuva, that doesn't work. So it seems like there is a very strong connection between each and every bracha. So either they should all begin with Vavs, or none of them should be with the Vav. Why necessarily is the Viru Shalai Mircha? Why is that? Why did that begin to Vav? This I have no clue whatsoever. So Sarah just said she found something on Google, which is always very helpful. Look up things nowadays. So yeah, we're glad to hear what she says. Yes.
Above here shows us that in honor of the righteous people, that Yerushalayim gets elevated. The Deris in Gilal David 10 explains, therefore, there's above Yerushalayim. Below Biftei Atfilah Shel Yerushalayim Ircha, Hi Ayatidav, Shemechoberet Latfilah Shelafanev, Bevav Achibor. Kefi she'ezkir po Harav Shmuel Eliyahu Tegmar B'Megillah Sheparnam Shel Tzadikim Mitromemet B'Yerushalayim Ba'al Ki Mizbar Ha'aderet Gilal David Ot Yud.
Okay, that's the answer I just gave right now. Yeah. Baruch Hashem was Mechaven to Rav Shmuel Eliyahu and Deret, who was Rav Kook's father-in-law, important rabbis. But I don't. It's hard for me to accept this as a full good answer because he's just saying what I said before, that in the Gemara Megillah Yud Zayin, it shows the connection between Tzadikim and Yerushalayim. That Yerushalayim will only be built when Am Yisrael is tzaddikim, and the tzaddikim will be elevated by Yerushalayim. But all that is true for all other brachas as well. There are explanations there on each and every bracha why it follows the other. Yes, let's see another one. Yeah. That makes most sense. Wow. That's a scary answer. That's a scary answer because I know, but Shmoneh Esrei. The Lamont Shinim, everyone says has to do with censorship of some sort. Yes, they say that too. Okay.
I don't say everyone. On Google,
yeah, that you saw. Okay, that makes 100% sense. But in Yerushalayim, there was an added vav in the 16th century, which is way after the tefillah was established by Lola and Shmuel HaKatan and everyone else, who has permission to add a letter to Shmoneh Esrei that wasn't original. In Shmoneh Esrei, it's very, very problematic because that's the peak epitome of the entire tefillah, and that's where to be very, very, very accurate. So you're right. There are different nusachim. We have nusach Sfard, nusach Ashkenaz. We have we have Yemenite. We have Italian. That it appears in manuscripts. The 16th century. Wow. I still wonder why in the 16th century would they add the vav? That's still a question. It's still a question. Oh wow. That's even worse. In Tanakh, he never finds it.
That's not true. They find it even in Rashi
Rashi's when you go back.
No, Rashi is something else. Rashi for sure. Rashi found many manuscripts of different editions of Rashi. But the Tanakh itself. Yeah. Oh, that's in the Birkas Hamazon, right? Wow. Yeah. No, I can understand. I can believe in that, but it's very, very bad. If that's true,
I've gone to many.
We should be cutting off the Vav now. I agree.
We must have some in our house, and we did this whole thing on it.
Who did? Who did?
It was so long that I don't remember what it was.
There was a lecture. Pierce gave a lecture. No, I'm aware of that. I'm aware of many of those differences. We use them a lot for the Riff project and everything. But in Shmoneh Esrei, it's very, very problematic. It's very, very problematic. Yep.
Most answers quote this.
No, the Derech was it was Rav Kook's father-in-law, so it wasn't too far back. No, he was Kook's father-in-law. His second, when he married his second wife, he married. Okay, very interesting. So it seems like that's the only answer that can be given as manuscript is that it was an added on Vav late beyond Chazal's period age. And okay, that's what we should go with, I guess, for now. It's interesting. Okay. But it just comes to show how we're so used to saying Shmoneh Esrei, we don't even notice things sometimes that quite stick out. I guess it just shows us, reminds us to focus more and try to realize what we're saying and see the different words and letters being used. It always adds to our kavanah, because when we understand why something is there, why a letter is there, word is here, word is there, or the order of the brachos, our kavanah strengthens as we pray. Okay, so going back to Chos Brachos. First, I'd like to say something that happened very interesting. This was Thursday evening. And Rabbi Fir Malka's radio show. I was about, and I had actually called into the radio station for going on his program to ask the question. The question was what Rivki asked last week. Now, I remind the question again. I had looked it up all over the place. I couldn't find something very solid to answer. And it's a very important question. I discussed it with some other people, and people had different thoughts, but no one knew exactly what to do. So first remind the question, then I'll tell you what happened with the radio station. It was very funny. Okay, so we'll start with the question last week. The question was, we had discussed the issue of Ikar and Tafel by Mizonos. We said that anytime something is intercooked together with Mizonos, it doesn't matter if it's a minority, as long as it's there to add flavor. You're interested in the flavor of the Mizonos, not just to stick things together or to puff something up by the flour that's there. It's not for those types of reasons. It's for the flavor or for filling up on the mizonos. You want it as something to fill you up. So in those two cases, you say mizonos no matter if it's a minority or majority of the food, as long as it's cooked or baked together. As we go along, we'll discuss situations where it wasn't cooked together, it was just added on the plate. But cooked together, baked together, it's always mizonos. So Rivki had asked the question last week, if we have a cheesecake, which has the bottom layer, like a crust on the bottom, is mizonos, and the rest on top is shehakol. So again, the bracha over the entire piece of cake is mizonos, because it's baked together. The question is, what happens if you can't get to the bottom because it's so thick? The top with the cheese and the sugar and all the other ingredients, whipped cream. Whipped cream is now very, very sad to mention whipped cream, because that's what happened to that woman or girl. Terrible. Just to mention whipped cream is scary now with the allergy, with the Fleischig restaurant serving milk whipped cream. Whatever, ice cream, whipped cream, whatever. We all scream. We all scream in this case. Yeah. Very, very terrible. And by the way, I don't think it's the fault of the mashgiach. Everyone says, how can it be a kosher restaurant with a meaty restaurant without a mashgiach? Because you can't expect a mashgiach to be there every second of the day. He comes in and out, which is halachically approved of. It's called yotzev and nichnas because they're afraid to do something wrong. He may pop in. Even a mashgiach tamid, even when one stays there the whole day, which is very rare. Even the badatzim can't have in every single restaurant or shop or bakery or whatever a mashgiach all hours. Now that's the case was. That's true. The case was it was the mistake, of course, of the first of all the worker who had bought it in the makol. What happened was they ran out of whipped cream, rice, whatever it was. They ran out of it that second. And they were serving, the restaurant has to serve whatever is ordered. So one of the workers ran out to the nearby makolet to get the ingredient, to get the product that was missing. Now that's something that, of course, it should not be done, but it should not be done for many, many reasons, not just kashrus reasons, for many reasons. You have no idea how fresh it is. Did you look at the date? There are many problems with doing such a thing. It's not the way a restaurant should function. It has a organized order. It orders its food once a day, once a week, whatever, and it should be all set. But sometimes what can you do? You run out of something. So that's not meant to be done. But a mashgiach, what's that? Right. Yeah, you ran out of something, so you run out and get it. Right. So that even a mashgiach, even there all the time, it's very difficult to catch such a thing because it's not meant to be done. And he can't be on the premises watching every worker doing what he could have been out to the bathroom. How does he know where he went now? He got out to the bathroom. He can't walk after him and see what he's doing. Maybe he went out to smoke. Who knows? He went out a few minutes. He has no idea. He has to inspect every worker coming in. What are you holding in the bags in your hand? That's already above and beyond what a mashgiach can be. That's true, but after to do it anyhow. They can't, but they do it anyhow. No mashgiach can catch such a thing. So I know I've heard of other cases that they run out of lettuce, so they get the regular lettuce, not the gush katif lettuce, and they don't wash it before, and you're served with the lettuce that's not approved of worms and all that. Yeah, it's very, very, very problematic. So I'm saying it's, Carol wrote to us in the UK, the mashgiach is there the whole time. Yeah, but still, it doesn't matter. Even the whole time can't really be watching every worker, whatever he does every second of the day. It's impossible. So I don't think it's the mashgiach's fault. It's definitely the worker's fault, and more so the one who sent him out to get the whipped cream outdoors. It's really that person's fault, whoever was in charge of the shift of that moment. Terrible, terrible. I'm sure now, not only they, everyone will lesson, all restaurants, I hope, at least for the short time being now, learn a lesson not to do such a thing ever. It's very, very sad. They played the last conversation that this girl had with her mother in the ambulance. She called her mother up and said, so in the car. Okay, so in the car towards the, she wasn't feeling well. She was feeling very bad on the way already.
The next lesson is always call an ambulance.
Yeah, that's true. I thought it was an ambulance, but maybe I was wrong. Whatever.
She drove herself to the hospital. She drove herself to the hospital, and on the way she spoke to her mother, and that was the recorded conversation. Yes, in her own car. She went to Ziv Hospital. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Anyhow, so last conversation was that she was speaking to her mother and saying, "I feel so bad. I feel very bad. I think I ate something milchik." So she goes, "How can that be? It's a fleishik restaurant." So she says, "I don't know. I'm dying. She said that to her mother. Nelechet lamut. That's her last word.
She had even worked. She'd worked in that restaurant as a waitress, and she knew the place. She knew there was nothing. Yes. That's what they said. She knew the place.
No.
Yeah.
Wow.
But there should be some other rule that restaurants can't buy food unless the mashgiach has seen what's been bought, like the stock.
That's definitely true.
What the stock
it's a rule. There's definitely
yes,
such a rule.
Yeah.
There definitely is such a rule, but how can you control when they go against the rules? How can you control such a thing? There's a rule, you're not supposed to do that. But when they run out of something, so they run out and get it. They can't afford going by the rules and having a guest not displeased with the restaurant. So they override the rules, they ignore the rules. That's the problem. There's of course a rule like that. But, what can you do? People don't go by rules all the time. So just saying, I don't think it's the hashgacha that's problematic in this case. It's the breaking of the rules that was problematic, and it almost cannot be expected of mashgiach to control this. Okay, anyway, back to our case here. So we're talking about the cheesecake with the whipped cream on top with the thick layer of cheese. So you can't, it's difficult sometimes to reach down, all the way down to the crust, to the bottom crust, in order to eat on the first spoonful or forkful of the cake, to reach all the way down and have some of that mizonos on the first bite. And then the question is, if the proper bracha is mizonos, and in the first bite you're not even having a bit of that mizonos, which bracha should you say? Should you say shehakol after all, because all that's on your fork or spoon is shehakol right now? Or due to the fact that altogether it's one piece of cake and you are going to reach the mizonos eventually, maybe the next bite, as you've dug in halfway through to get the first spoonful, now you're going to dig in all the way down to the bottom to get the mizonos. It could be the next bite you're going to have the mizonos. But what do you say for the first bite? So I was looking it up in Mizos Bracha and other places. I couldn't find discussion about this. I found similar situations, but not exactly this. I'll tell you what I found because it's also halachically important to know. The Aruch HaShulchan, of Mordechai Epstein, the father of the Torah Tamima, Baruch Epstein, the Aruch HaShulchan discusses a case where you have such a combination of foods, mizonos, shehakol, ha'etz, all combined in the proper brachas, let's say mizonos. And as you're eating, there are definitely here and there some spoonfuls that do not include mizonos. That could very easily happen. You're having burgul with all kinds of vegetables on it, and a few times as you're taking some of it to eat, you have only the vegetables on your fork or on your spoon, and no burgul, which is mizonos. So that, he says, is definitely mizonos no matter what. The idea is that majority of the times that you take from that food, you will have mizonos included on the fork. So it doesn't matter that once in a while, here and there, there's only ha'adam or only a shehakol that's on your fork. What? Correct. That doesn't matter if it's cooked together, but it still has to be majority mizonos in that case. It's a minority of mizonos when it wasn't cooked together, so you say two brachos. We haven't gotten that yet when it's not cooked together. But I'm just saying, if the bracha would have been mizonos to begin with, and during the time you're eating from it, once in a while, you take up something that has no mizonos included, that doesn't matter. That we don't mind. We don't need a separate bracha for that. On the other hand, it says that if many times, as you're eating from that food, many times you're going to have only a shehakol or a dama on your fork, even though it has mizonos included, then you should be saying two separate brachos. Because in the end, it turns out that this is a case where, this wouldn't matter if it was cooked together or not. Right? I just think of this a moment. Think of this a moment. If it was cooked together, but still the majority of times you eat from that food, you're not gonna have mizonos on your fork. That could easily happen by a cheesecake, because even if you had the first time mizonos, wow, you hardly touch it. Right. Or sometimes the cheesy part is combined with flour also. Sometimes there's a cheesecake that has a lot of flour within. Right, in the cheesecake part itself. But it has to be also for added flavor or to fill you, and not for connecting things. Then it's not mizonos anyhow. And the cheesecake is not for that reason. It's not for the taste or for filling you. I know to check all these situations why it's there. But wow, that's a good question also. If it was cooked or baked together, with the majority of, no, I would think that in that case, it's a tafel just because it's like considered like one piece altogether because it's cooked together. And then it wouldn't matter if it's how many times you have the mizonos part in your fork, you would still say mizonos. Again, in the meantime, as long as your first spoonful, your first fork you take includes mizonos. In the meantime, we're talking about that case. But it doesn't matter if the majority of the times it wouldn't include mizonos since it was cooked together. So it's considered all one piece no matter what, and therefore it's always mizonos. But if it wasn't cooked together, and still you would say mizonos because let's say there's a majority of mizonos in the mixture. But once in a while you have a spoonful that doesn't include mizonos, that doesn't matter. But if it's quite often, quite frequent, as you're eating this food, that you're taking up the food and without any mizonos on it, so you'd have to say a separate bracha over the other type that's mixed with the mizonos. That's like, for example, I'll give you an example for that. Right. Yeah. I'm going back to, okay, that's your question. Right. But in the meantime, that's what I found beforehand. Plus, I found the other discussion, which we spoke about many times. If in the end of this mixture that you had mizonos and non-mizonos together, if in the end you're left only with non-mizonos, let's say our famous cereal and milk situation. If we decide that cereal milk is really the main component is the cereal, and the cereal was hadama or mizonos, one of those brachos. And the milk, we don't say a separate shahakol because it's nullified to the cereal, which is the majority. And now you're left with just a little bit of milk at the bottom of the bowl after you finish all the cereal. So he said, if you're left with just a little bit, which you wouldn't have poured yourself as a cup of milk to drink, then you don't say shahakol. Even if you're just left with milk and you just drink it up without any mizonos or any adama, no cereal left, you don't say shahakol. But if you're left with like half a cupful of milk, which would be the amount a person would pour for themselves to drink from in the middle of the day if they were thirsty, so then you do need to say shahakol. At the very end, after I finish the cereal and milk, if you have such an amount of milk left over, you do need to say shahakol in the end. So these are things we discussed, and I found that that's clear. But it still doesn't answer the situation where it was cooked or baked together. So definitely deserves a mizonos as the first bracha. And you're going to have it all through the session of eating that piece of cake. But the very first bite does not include mizonos. Does that matter? Or it's like the very end. In my mind, I would compare it to having leftover milk at the very end. What does it matter if it's the first or last bite? As long as majority of the times, or at least you definitely will have some of the mizonos as you're eating along, and it's baked together. So it's all considered one piece of mizonos cake. So what does it matter if the first bite doesn't include? It's still a very small minority of the times that you'll be eating without the mizonos. Or we don't even care, as long as you will be reaching. If you don't ever touch the mizonos, let's say for diet reasons, you don't want to eat the crust at all, only the cheese part, then it's definitely shahakol. That's no question. The tafel, the idea that it's secondary to the mizonos has to be that you're eating the mizonos as well. But what does it matter if it's on the first bite or second bite? That's what I would think logically. So, but since I wasn't sure, I was... No, not at all. It's an added whipped cream after. No way. You can't bake whipped cream. It would... Okay. Oh, we discussed that last week, right? That's a different type of cheesecake. The crust is made on itself, or sometimes people buy just cheesecake crust. They buy one already made, and then they just plump the cheese part onto it or into it, and that's it. It's never baked together. So he said that's like a crembo. That's definitely two separate brachos in that case. Say two separate brachos. You say a bracha over the crust, mizonos, and a bracha over the cheese part, shahakol. Two separate brachos. Because they're both important, equally important. even though the majority here, in this case, is the cheese, the majority volume-wise is the cheese, the quantity, but since the quality of mizonos is so high, it never gets nullified, even if it's a minority. But it does deserve, so it does deserve a bracha, but it doesn't override the majority, which is not mizonos. So it has two brachos in this case. You say two separate brachos. You should try to say the mizonos first and break from the crust a piece and eat that, and then say shehakol over the cheese. If it's difficult to reach.
Even if you have the mizonos first, why would you say the shehakol?
No, we're talking about a case Amy just asked before. I don't know if you're listening. She was asking. I'm sure. No problem. Okay. Okay. So no, Amy was talking about a case where the crust was prepared on its own, itself. And then the cheese was added on after. It's not baked together. Right. That's a crembo. Say two brachos. And you should try to start with the biscuit on the bottom if you can. Same as zonas. But if it's too complicated, make a whole mess out of it. Then you can start with the shehakol, and then when you reach the crust, the same as zonas. By the way, same as an ice cream in a cone. Ice cream in a cone wasn't baked together, of course, two separates, so it's two brachos. But in this case, and again, if you can somehow bite from the cone first, better. If you can't, then you start with the shehakol, and then when you reach the cone, same as zonas. But this is a difference here. The difference in two types of ice cream cones. There's an ice cream cone that's just a piece of dikt, we call it in Hebrew. It's just like cardboard. Has no flavor to it. It's just there to hold the ice cream. Some people don't even eat it, and some people do, but it's nothing. It's not, doesn't add any flavor. Then there's no bracha to it, even though it's made from flour. It is a mizonos product, but since it's totally tafel, secondary to the ice cream, it's only to hold the ice cream. It's there it's like a cup. Instead of ice cream in a cup, you have the cone, but it's nothing tasty at all. So there's no bracha whatsoever. Whereas if it's a sweetened cone, right? If it's sweetened cone, sugar cone, then you say a separate mizonos because it has good taste to it. Right.
We had this with the ice cream sandwiches
also, that's two brachas also, right? The separate brachas.
On some of them they weren't.
We'll soon speak about, right? I know what you mean. By the way, this situation, we had learned on Shavuot last year when we had those different homes. We skipped over to different homes and gave the shirim. Right, the Venezuela ice cream. That was a Shavuot lesson. It's exactly 11 months ago because it's now Zayin Iyar, and it was Vavs Sivan. Right, you were there. But there were a few homes that opened their homes for shirim, and the rabbis skipped from home to home to give the various shirim in different homes. Yeah, it was a very nice idea. It was the Corona Shavuot. I know if this year they're probably going back to shul, I assume. We'll see. We'll see what will happen this Shavuot. But right, not the children, but they can be by Bennett, the grass there, across the Bennett. They can have this shiurim outdoors. Okay. Anyway, so back to the question of beginning with something non-mizonos for a mizonos cake. So I called into the radio show for Malka to ask this question exactly. And then for some reason, I don't know how, as when you call in, so they tell you, we have your number, we'll call you back when it's your turn. Usually they give you like one before your turn. So you have to ask the question immediately. You get to hear one previous question on the phone. And then the moment he says goodbye, then you ask your question. So as I was waiting for them to make the call back to me for me to ask the question, for some reason, I don't know why, I decided to look it up again in the book, in Rav Pirlach's book, where I had searched before, obviously the first where I couldn't find. This time I looked back in the Mafteach Yanim, in table of contents, in the glossary, and Ikavet Tafel, and suddenly I fall upon, it's a very, very detailed Mafteach. So you find all different cases in the Mafteach Yanim, and Ikavet Tafel takes up almost 2 pages of just the glossary, 2 pages. So there's many, many, many examples. And suddenly I fall upon something that sounded to me like this is our question. And sure enough, I open the book itself to where it says, sure enough, I find the answer right there. I'll soon tell you what the answer was.
Bye.
But then, no, I I hung up the phone before already because they call you back, which is a good service. It's a very good service. I had to hold on to the phone for half an hour. So I was prepared to tell the person who calls me back, which isn't, of course, the Rav. I prepared to tell him, skip me because I have the answer already. I found the answer. When he calls me back, I was about to say that, and he goes to me, Shalom, it's your turn now. So I go, I was like sort of astonished, and I say, because it's usually one before my turn. This time he goes, it's your turn now. So I go, right now. He says, Ken tatchil. And I hear Rav Filmaka saying goodbye to the previous one. So I was stuck. I had to ask a question. so in a spur of a moment, I switched the question totally to something else I had to ask. I was puzzled, which turns out for the first time that I recall, his answer was, I don't know. The first time ever on the radio, but he's very humble. He said it was a question about Shemitah, which I won't bring up right now. That's a whole different course. And we're learning Shemitah in the Coordinate Minyan, which Baruch Hashem came back to normal and we're back to davening here in the Beis Medrash. So after the Coordinate Minyan, there's a Shir on Shlomo Zalman's work. So we're doing Shemitah now. So I had a question regarding Shemitah, which I wasn't planning to ask him then, but no choice. So I asked that. I was about to ask that question. So I told him I have a Shemitah question. This is mamish a split second. I switched the question. So he says like this, before he even heard the question, he says, oh, if it's Shemitah, I have to say the truth. It was 7 years ago that I studied the issue of Shemitah, and I haven't yet gone over it for this coming Shemitah, which I was a drop surprised because it's getting close. And yeah, so he says he will, of course, delve into it and do, and I'll give a whole series of Shurim on Shemitah as well and all that. He was definitely preparing to do so, but he said he hasn't yet reviewed Hilchos Shemitah this cycle. So he's sorry, but he won't take the question. He wouldn't even hear the question. He was humble and very, very sincere about the situation. So I didn't even ask the question. I said, thank you, goodbye. And that's how we got off that issue. It was very fair of a second. So anyway, what is the answer to the question? It was very surprising to me when I read it in between the time when I called in and the time that I was accepted. I read the answer. The answer very surprising. The answer is that you should make your utmost effort to reach the Mizonos part of the cake. Yeah, and many people told me flip over the cake so that the crust is on the top, and then take a piece of that, and then flip back. Yeah, but to somehow get to the main component, which doesn't have to be, by the way, Mizonos versus others. It could be a fruit salad, which has majority of ha'etz in it and minority of hadama. And the top part has the adama, let's say. A few like pineapple pieces on the top or banana pieces on the top. And underneath you have the oranges and apples and dates and all the other things. So make sure, because the bracha there is ha'etz, because you go by majority, make sure that you have on your first fork ha'etz and not only hadama. You can have both together, but not only hadama. Even the bracha in general will be ha'etz. Because the bracha is ha'etz, you should have ha'etz on your first fork. What happens if you can't? And the what? Burgul. Correct. Anything you're eating that has a certain first bracha, make sure to have that piece of that food on your first forkful to eat. But what happens if it's so complicated and too difficult to reach into the place, to the part of the food that has that original first bracha to make, and you can't get to it? He says make a separate bracha over the first forkful or spoonful. That's not the real bracha over this entire food. That was very surprising to me. You have to make a separate bracha. You say shehakol, even though most of the time you're going to be having mizonos included, and the cake is a mizonos cake. But since you can't, so that's why to make a special effort. Yeah, right. But that's another issue that really have to look up again to see if it's baked together and the majority of bites you'll be taking will not include the mizonos. Is it anyway a shehakol? Or since it was baked together and...
You have to make the mizonos. Definitely a shehakol.
No, mizonos you definitely have to say, because that we said even if it wasn't baked together and the minority is mizonos, you still say mizonos. No, the question is it only mizonos? Is it only mizonos or is it shehakol? If the first bite, yes, then you'd say a separate shehakol and then definitely mizonos as well. But what happens if you tried hard and you got to the crust and you said mizonos to begin with because that's the original bracha? But majority of bites you'll be eating from that cake will not include mizonos. That's a question where, right, it was baked together. That's my assumption also, right? That's my assumption also. No, but if it wasn't baked together, and you have majority of times you have in your fork you'll have the mizonos, let's say. No, sorry, it wasn't baked together, but the majority of the food is, let's say, a mizonos or an eitz or whatever. But many, many times as you're eating from this food, you will have the other ingredient, which isn't the one you benched over, you said the bracha over. So then you would have to say separate bracha. I have to clear and make this all clear. But next week I'll make it even more clear. But at least this point we now know for sure that if on the first fork you do not have of the food, any of the food that you're saying the bracha over, it's different than the last food. If it's leftover last foods, that's what it was interesting to find out. That if the first bracha was ha'etz, and you left over the very end with only a shehakol component, but it's a very little amount, you do not say shehakol. But if the first bite is a shehakol versus the majority, which is ha'etz, and it's just the first bite going to be a separate, for shehakol, all the rest you'll be having ha'etz, you do have to say shehakol.
Because obviously, when you say left over, means it wasn't the part left over.
Right.
As opposed to the first. So just by the way you're describing it.
But not necessarily is the first bite making it the ikar. Doesn't that? Why does that necessarily make it the ikar? It's just because it's unreachable right now. Yeah, but that could be. Right. Right. Yeah, but if it's a minority, so it's always like a leftover thing, meaning it's always the minority in the food. It's just technically speaking, it's hard to reach the majority right now because the top layer is the minority. Let's say, you know what, I'll give you another case. Here, this could be amazing, amazing. Let's say you have a challah cake all full of flour, definite mizonos, no question whatsoever. But on top, you have topping, a whipped cream or a frosting on top of the cake, which wasn't baked together. It wasn't baked together. It was topped after the baking. Now, the bracha is obviously mizonos, no question in the world. It's a mizonos bracha for all this together. The topping is nullified to the main cake itself. No question, it's a mizonos serving right now. But for some reason, a kid likes licking off the whipped cream first before it digs into the cake itself. They like the frosting much more than the cake itself. Now, if they're not going to be eating the cake at all, they're only licking off the frosting or scraping off frosting or the whipped cream, which wasn't made together, then it's definitely shehakol. For them, they're not eating the cake at all. Even if it were baked together, actually. Even if it was baked together, but they're scraping off only the shehakol part from the top and not eating the cake at all, then it's shehakol. It gets nullified only if you eat the ikar. If you don't eat the ikar, it doesn't get nullified to anything. But what happens if you're planning on eating the cake itself also? The next bite will include the cake. But right now in front of you, you have a nice chunk of whipped cream on top, and it's delicious for you to eat that first. So here that's what we're talking about. That would be a case where that whipped cream is definitely nullified to the cake, no question. As you're going to have the cake, as you're going to have the whole piece, you're going to be having it together, and it's definitely just to add some flavor to the chocolate cake. It's not anything of its own, but happens to be that the first spoonful includes only whipped cream. That's very problematic because that would force you to say shehakol, even though the cake itself is definitely mizonot and the rest of the eating is even mizonot. That would force you to say shehakol because you're eating it alone because it's the first thing that came up on your spoon. It doesn't necessarily mean that it's not nullified too. It's still nullified too, but just technically speaking, it came up first. So that's why he says, try your best that should not happen to begin with at all. Try your best not to have the first spoonful of whipped cream if you're planning on having the cake itself. So dig in, take and the first spoonful some of the cake. You can have included with some whipped cream, of course, but have at least some of the cake on your first spoonful. So you say only mizonos, and then you eat the entire cake with only mizonos. But if for some reason you can't reach it, or you have this craze about having just the whipped cream first bite, it looks so delicious and yummy on its own. So you have to say a separate shakol, and then mizonos when you dig into the cake. That's another such example. Yeah.
Here's where I'm confused. In a question of ikar and tafel.
Yes.
I think I get ikar and tafel confused sometimes with majority minority.
Okay.
It's not necessarily the same.
True.
So which is, I feel like they're kind of used interchangeably. Which is
okay.
Really
so explain right. Good question here. The ikar and tafel issue versus majority minority. Actually, ikar and tafel is the concept. It doesn't necessarily explain what is considered, what makes something ikar. It's always true that we say.
Majority minority is subjective. I mean, one is a clear thing, and ikar and tafel is not. I can eat spaghetti and meatballs, and to me, I'd much the ikar is the spaghetti.
Right.
I'll put on one meatball with sauce, so the majority is clearly spaghetti. They weren't cooked together. So I would make a mizono.
Right.
But for someone else, the ikar might be the meatballs, and they might take more meatballs, even if the spaghetti is still the majority.
Right.
And it's meat. That's the ikar.
Right. Okay. So, right. The idea, the question is whether it's something objective or subjective, the ikar and tafel issue. So it's actually both. It's a little complicated here. We'll say like this. To define ikar and tafel, there could be various definitions. It could be majority minority. Automatically, the moment there's a majority versus a minority in a mixture of food, then the majority is the ikar, the minority is the tafel. No matter what you prefer, what you like more, that could be one definition of what makes something ikar versus tafel. It could be, like we just said now, mizonos versus anything else. The mizonos is automatically the ikar. At least when it was baked and cooked together, it doesn't matter, minority, majority, subjective, objective, mizonos overrides all other foods. And it could be very subjective. These two are objective. Majority, minority is objective, and mizonos is objective. It's there or not. But it could be subjective. For example, the ice cream cone that we said before, like a tasteless one. So, well, okay, that's not really subjective because it's tasteless. But let's take a case where, let's take the cone. Yeah, okay, but I want to make it even more obvious subjective, right? Let's say a cone that's a sweetened cone. It does have good taste to it. So most people enjoy eating the cone itself. But let's say you're a person who dislikes it even though it's sweet. You don't like the cone. It's not tasty to you. Or you don't want it you don't really need it for eating. There is such a thing. The ice cream doesn't even come up. The tilon. Tilon, what we call tilon. Right, the cone is all the way to the top, and the ice cream is at the same level. Right. You have to bite the cone first. Right. So, yeah, that's good too. No, but it all depends whether you're enjoying the cone or not. Okay. Okay. But even if the ice cream is on top, and you're eating the ice cream first and you say shehakol, you get to the cone, you eat it also, but it's not because you're enjoying the cone at all. Right, you don't want the cone. That's subjective tafel, because all your intent with the cone is just to hold on to the ice cream. How else can you hold on to the ice cream if it's not for the cone? So even if it's tasty to many people would say mizonos, if for you personally, you have no interest in eating the cone at all, even though it's a tasty cone, you don't like it, or it's against your diet, nutrition instructions or whatever, but you're eating it anyhow. So because you want to get to the ice cream, it's deep down, so you have to eat it on the way. So you don't say any bracha, because for you, it's just there as a cup to hold on to the ice cream. So that's what I'm saying. On one hand, there are solid clear definitions of ikav v'tafel for all kinds of reasons, majority, minority, mizonos versus other foods, all kinds of those type of things. But then also included within those categories and definitions is also a subjective matter, which is, do you have any interest in eating this or not at all? Just like the famous Mishnah in Brachot, it says, Berach ala maliach patar et pat. Could even be bread in those days. These days, it's hard to imagine that would be the whole purpose of bread. But in those days, you used to have very salty herring, maliach, very salty herring, which was so salty they needed something to break down the saltiness of it. So they used bread to break down the saltiness. So the bread had no purpose as a food. It was only to break down, or if you not want to touch the herring in your hand, so use a cracker just to hold on to the herring. And no interest in the cracker. It could be a delicious cracker. But your intent is only to hold on to the herring with it. There's no fork, spoon available, so you use a cracker. In all those cases, you don't say a bracha over the bread or the cracker. Even though bread and cracker could be very tasty and other people would eat it definitely to fill up on. So it all depends. So there are two things. There's the objective definitions of ikav v'tafel, which come for very different reasons, various different reasons. And we'll be seeing them as we go along. In class, we'll be seeing all kinds of situations, what defines ikav v'tafel in all kinds of ways. But besides all the objective definitions, there's this subjective ideas that have to also be discussed. And nowadays, I would say that it would be very difficult to define something as subjectively tafel. Subjectively tafel. Because in our days, we have forks and spoons and knives. We should not be needing a food to help us hold something or even break down the saltiness of something. We just don't make it that salty anymore. It's very difficult to, if you come to a kiddush, let's say, and there's herring and crackers. Who can be sure, who of us can be sure that they're eating the cracker only to hold on to the herring, but they have no interest in the cracker whatsoever? It's hard to say that because you're starving after the Shabbos service, morning service, long service. You would like some of the cracker to fill up on also, not just as your fork. Otherwise, take a fork and eat the herring alone. So nowadays, it's very rare that subjectively something can be defined as tafel. Again, unless it's tafel because objectively it's in one of the categories of minority or other things. So then you would say, no, then you could, no, in the case where it wasn't baked together and you're interested in both, you say two brachos in that case. Because you're interested. Right, but if you have equal interest, because herring and crackers, you're right. If your main interest is the cracker, and the herring is there just to add some flavor to your cracker, you put them together, right? But what's your intent? Let's say I'll give you another case, easier. If you have, but if you spread cheese over a cracker. Oh, now when it's not the case that the milk is not, it's important to me even as equally or more important, then we say anyway two brachos. We don't say only shakal over the milk. We still need to say mizonos over the cereal, because mizonos never becomes tefel even if it's minority. So I'm saying the same thing here. If the cracker and the herring are equally important to you, you're enjoying the herring as much as you're enjoying the cracker, then it's two separate brachos. That's like the cereal milk when you equally enjoy the milk, or even more so than you're enjoying the cereal. But if, let's say, you spread some cheese over a cracker, or tchina or hummus over the cracker, that's definitely only mizonos, because that shows the difference is that when you spread something over a cracker, that shows that you're just giving it a nice flavor, a nicer flavor. It's not at all there to eat as a chunk of its own. No, you think you're eating the spread as a
platter, and there's soft brie cheese. So you can take a piece of hard cheese, and it's like the herring.
Right.
Sometimes you take soft cheese. You want it both the cheese and the crackers, so you'll spread it. But it's like.
But usually the spreading of the cheese over a cracker is not to eat the cheese; it's to give the flavor to the cracker. That's usually what it is. You don't think so? That's what I think. When you have bread, you spread peanut butter over bread. You spread things over bread. It's just to give the bread some better flavor. You're filling up on the. No, but I'm saying, yeah, but I'm saying they're filling up on the bread. That's what they're. That's what makes them full and satiated.
I wanted the green trina.
Okay.
So I had to use the cucumber to eat the trina. I literally broke that cucumber into 4 pieces. It was just my spoon, basically.
Why didn't you take a spoon? Yeah, no spoons available?
Because we were at a barbecue. I don't know. There was no spoon.
So I say that's a case where there's no spoon there and you're just using it as a spoon.
I would have just kept using the same spoon.
Aha.
You can't double dip.
It's not right. It's not.
Break it. I'm just saying, it's not that the cracker or the cheese is like the tuna. It's I was after the green tuna. I was not after the
cucumber.
Cheese platter, that's a dish.
No, I know I had to say
the cracker is more of a cream for the cheese platter.
For the cheese platter?
Yeah.
I understand that with hard cheese or yellow cheese. I understand that it's slightly separate. Right, then you can eat a piece. So that's why I understand that it's not combined with. It's not for the cracker. It's for two separate. It's two separate entities.
Not a cream cheese, but a cheese that you want to spread on the cracker.
Right. The cheese is the important thing there. Yeah. Napoleon type, right? But I believe still, people normally, as far as I'm aware, people normally don't eat like spoonfuls of cheese on its own. Bichlal. You always have it over something, over bread or over cracker or over something. It's a spread. That's what I'm saying. It's a spread. The moment it's spread, that defines it as nullified to what you're spreading it on. I understand your point here. Sometimes maybe people just prefer just the cheese and they know where to take it up on, so they use a cracker. That's true. Then it's true. But if it's just a spread over the cracker, over bread, then the cracker, after all, is the main thing. Because it's a motzi, right. But I'm trying to explain that it's the same type of situation with the cracker as well. It's like a bread, regardless of the fact that a motzi covers that all, so you don't need to say a bracha. But it's right. That's what I'm saying. It is somewhat subjective, but it's mainly objective in our days. That
it's subjective, but the halachic ruling is not
subjective. True. That's maybe a better way to say it. In our days, in the days of the Mishnah, was much more subjective.
She wants she ate the cracker because there was no plate and she wanted the herring.
Okay.
It doesn't make a difference.
No, if it's clearly so, you have no interest in the cracker, it's not to fill you, it's not for the taste, right. Clearly just as a plate, and even nowadays you don't say mizonos. It's true, even nowadays, don't say mizonos, just say shakal. No, so that's not true, because that's what the Mishnah says. Achalet apat. Right, okay. There's a plate. That's true.
In order to have the herring anyway.
So then you have to have mizonos separately, right? For the kiddush, you have to have mizonos just to be called seuda. So anyway, you have to say mizonos. To have cake, cookie, right? But if you're just eating in the middle of the day, no, not in the kiddush, in the middle of the day, you're just having herring and holding it you need the cracker. Then it's even in our days, you're not saying mizonos. You're eating the cracker. And even if you have leftover cracker that has no herring on it, you still have to say. Because in the end, you finish most of the cracker and you're left with a little piece of cracker in your hand. That too doesn't require mizonos because it's still just left over from the herring, which was the main component. Over other crackers. That's a good idea also, right. If it was only a plate, you wouldn't care which cracker you're taking. Whatever. Okay. That's what I said. It's very hard to define, but we go by the general rules, and that's probably more relevant nowadays than subjective issues because we're not sure of ourselves. That's a problem. Okay, so we'll stop at this. After next week, we'll cover more. Okay, take care. Call too. Wait 1 second.
Thank you very much, Rob Steinberg.
Wow, very welcome, very welcome.
Thank you for the Kiddush. It was beautiful.
I just saw Carol. Yeah, I just saw your message. Wow. Oh, wow. You're doing hospital twice. No, they should have these the shots against allergy. They should have them in every single restaurant, store, everywhere.
She carries a pen with her.
That's what they said. They said it.
Yes.
She didn't have it with her. She didn't take it with her because she was sure there was nothing milchik in the restaurant.
That's a big mistake. You can't trust people. You can't trust them.
Trust anything. Right. Right. So yeah, that's also.
Thank you very much. Have a good week. Bye-bye.
A great week. Bye.